Hello everyone, we are ready for chapter 30. I really like this one. This one's got a cliffhanger, so it's like, oh, we're going to have to wait until tomorrow for the next part. Anyway, chapter 30. And now, my dear readers, we must move forward a pace in the story, for I'm sure there are many things you still want to discover about the characters and their adventures. We will come back in about 5 years on from where we last left our faithful little band. The hunters have, of course, long moved on and are trekking through new lands and discovering new treasures. The smith and his family have been walking on the King's Road now for some time, and young Johnny is now a fine, strapping lad of 15 or so. Our own Freddie has grown too and is now 12 years old and growing in strength and wisdom. Mr. Newhart and Mrs. Beloved of the King are expecting their second child, their first being a little girl whom they called Hope, and they are looking forward to soon meeting their next little one, as Mrs. Beloved of the King will be due in about 6 weeks' time. Miss Poor in Spirit, like old Naomi before her, had the great joy of seeing Hope be born into the family before she went blind. But she knows their little home so well, she is managing beautifully, and still holds regular meetings with the women of the town, who love her dearly, and now even more for her grace and patience in her new suffering. Now, who else might you want to know about? Ah, yes, Mr. Set Free continues his commission, and has joined another dragon slayer by the name of Mr. Surehope, and the two have made good their attack. They've even started making other men and women aware of the dangers of harbouring such an enticing beast as a pet, and so many folk have been saved from destruction purely from taking the warning from these two men seriously. Mr. Ears to Hear, for he is no longer of an age where he can be called a young man, has surely put on spiritual muscle since being under the mentorship of the two good men, Mr. Saved by Grace and Mr. Discover the Truth, and the three have become adept at hunting out and discovering treasure of many kinds. And now you may remember that Freddie had been warned when he was younger about wolves of a different kind by the ever-faithful officer of the King, who is ever the same and never changes, so there isn't any new news about him. Well, we are going to swoop back in on that part of the story, for it has a good lesson for each of us to learn. Freddie had requested to be baptized, as he had seen from what he had read in the King's book that this was something he should do. Not that it saved him, for he was saved all those years ago on the pirate ship, but rather to make a public declaration that he belonged to the King and was going to follow him all his days. Mr. Newhart was of course delighted at this, as were the rest of the family, and 2 other people wanted to be baptized too. So Mr. Newhart, having known them to be truly the King's followers, and seen their fruits since, had suggested that they make an occasion of it and go down to the river one Saturday afternoon and invite the whole town. The other 2 people to get baptised were Mrs. My Weakness is His Strength, formerly Mrs. Strongwill, the librarian, which was a great joy for Mrs. Beloved of the King, and one Master Serve the Lord, who was one of the young men who had had that fight, if you remember, in the market square. He had been visiting with Mr. Discover the Truth before he left for his hunting, and had then carried on with Mr. Newhart, who had the joy of seeing him truly changed by the King. Mr. Newhart had written to Mr. Discover the Truth to tell him the wonderful news, and so the 3 hunters were making their way back to the town to witness the baptism of the young man and Freddie, of course. The town itself had been renamed. So influential was the good news of the King, it was no longer called Unreached, but now bore the name Restored, and such were the prayers of the faithful in that town that many more would be added to their number. Mrs. Beloved of the King had also written to Mrs. Ernest, the smithy's wife, if you recall, to tell her of the happy news of their growing family and also of the church, and so unbeknownst to her, that family were also making their way back to the town. Now, back to Freddie. He was out in the field looking after Hope, who was about 4 years old. He loved his little sister and wanted to teach her so much about the King and the Prince Emmanuel. He had been a great help to his parents when Hope was born, and now that there was a new little brother or sister on the way, he was very good at looking after Hope, so his mother could rest. They sat together in one of the nearby fields. Freddie had his big Bible on his lap, and Hope was sitting next to him, her little short legs stuck out in front of her, her little curls of hair falling down her back, and her chubby hands trying to make a daisy chain for her mother. "And now, Hope," said Freddie importantly, "I'm going to tell you one of my favourite stories." "Oh, blast and bother," said Hope, as she put her little fingernail through yet another daisy stem. "Freddie, help, please," she said in her sweetest voice, holding out her crumpled daisy chain. Freddie looked at her lovingly. "Let me tell you a story first, and then I'll help you, okay?" Hope threw down her daisy chain and snuggled into her big brother. She loved his Bible storytelling, because they felt so real when he told them. "Yes, please," she said. "Right then," said Freddie. "Did you know that the King can make the impossible happen just like that?" Freddie asked, and so the wondrous story of the floating axe head was told. Hope gasped as the axe head that the student had borrowed flew off through the air and then plopped into the water, which of course Freddie acted out, being a very good storyteller. And my, how little Hope cheered when the prophet Elisha prayed and the heavy metal axe head floated to the water and to the shore. Hooray! She cheered. Again! Freddie never minded telling the story again, and Hope, who now knew the details, joined in when yet again the axe head went splosh into the water. After telling the story 4 times, as Hope had asked for it again and again, Freddie decided it was nearly time to go home, so, as promised, he helped Hope finish her daisy chain for their mother. Freddie was a good big brother, and he loved having Hope to teach and to play with too. He did not mind making a daisy chain with her at all. "Sissy preacher's boy, playing with flowers and babies," came a jeering set of voices, and Freddie looked up, going quite crimson. "I was just helping my sister," he said, giving the daisy chain back to Hope. "Oh, the preacher's boy is helping like a goody two-shoes," sneered another boy from the group. Freddie felt himself getting hot and cross. "Come on, Hope, let's go. I'm sure Mother will be expecting us." He tried to ignore the angry feelings welling up inside him. "He's not a sissy, he's my nice big brother," cried Hope in a very defensive voice with a hint of tears in her eyes. "Drop it, Hope. Let's just go," said Freddie crossly. "That's right, go home to Mummy," said the boys. "Don't forget your flowers," said one of the boys, throwing a fistful of dirt and grass and daisies at Hope, who began to cry. That did it for Freddie. "Leave off or you'll be sorry," he threatened, and turning to Hope, he said, "Run home to Mum and tell her I'll be late for tea." "But Freddie, won't Mummy be cross?" said Hope, still sniffing. "Just wash yourself before going into the house and don't tell her anything," warned Freddie. Hope toddled off, clutching her daisy chain in her hand and feeling very worried. Freddie dusted himself down and clenched his fists. "Right then," he whispered. "Who threw that?" Now, as with most bullies, when they saw they were being stood up to, the boys started running away. But Freddie now had the bit between his teeth, and he intended to teach the boys a good lesson. He started running after them. The boys were quick, but so was Freddie. They carried on running out of the town, much further than Freddie knew he was really allowed to go. Gradually the distance between them got further. Then suddenly, out of the bushes, ahead of the boys, jumped 2 animals that snarled and barked. The boys jumped back and started running home, and when Freddie saw them, so did he. The boys, who were not wearing armour, you must understand, could run a good deal faster, and soon left Freddie behind. But as Freddie looked over his shoulder, he could see the 2 animals were gaining on him. Freddie was really scared. Were they wolves? They certainly sounded and looked like them. "Oh, please help me," he called out. He was starting to get tired and knew he wouldn't be able to keep running long enough to get back to the safety of the town. He realised he was going to have to fight, so he stopped. He reached for his sword and turned round, ready. Just then there was a whistle, and the 2 animals suddenly lay down. Freddie was very unnerved by this, as the animals suddenly went very still, which is what some predators do just before they pounce. Then, as he stood there, sweating with fear, he noticed the wolf-like creatures were wearing collars. There was the whistle again, and the 2 animals shuffled closer, but very low to the ground. Freddie held out his sword. Were these more wolves, sent by the evil one, like the ones from years ago with the number 666 on the collars? One of the animals snarled and edged closer. Freddie raised his sword. That's the end of that chapter. Oh.